All right, great. Well, now, we moved from chapter 5 to chapter 6, Daniel in the lion's den. And clearly not talking about football because he was in danger. And Detroit Lions never threatened hardly anybody. How did they do this year? They bad as usual, right?
Yeah, pretty bad.
They didn't threaten anybody. All right. Yeah. But the important thing is the Dallas Ouch Boys got beat. So but here you have a situation. Daniel in the lion's den is really parallel to the fiery furnace. Similar situation. But something to observe. You know, Daniel's been made a leader. Darius is in charge. The Persians have taken over. Daniel's been elevated. But he's now recognized and he's going to be put in sole charge, and his enemies are jealous. And their strategy is take his strength and make it a weakness. Because Daniel's character is the key here. They know they can't get him on any character issue. He's honest, he's hardworking, and he's gifted. So what do we do? Well, he's devoted to his God. Let's set up the situation where he has to break the law. That's the bottom line. And of course, it's a familiar story in that he continues to pray 3 times a day to Jerusalem. Why is he doing that? On what basis does he do that?
Back to Solomon's edict to eat without
That's right.
the temple.
That's right. It's back to Solomon's prayer and God's promise to hear. And Daniel's praying to the temple, praying to God. And in Judaism, they prayed at least 3 times a day. In Islam, they pray 5 times a day. In Christianity, we pray once a week.
Or once in an emergency.
Yeah, once in an emergency. Yeah. I think that's something that I'm convicted about, that I need to be praying more and praying regularly and not getting so busy that I don't. It's real challenging, especially for men. Men are worse prayers than women. And yet that should be an integral part of our lives. It was of Daniel's. He took the time to do it. And so they set up the situation for his destruction. Again, these lions' dens, they have excavated some. They're holes in the ground, pretty big. I would say at least 2-3 times the size of this room. And the way they did it is you had this hole in the ground, it was covered, and it had 2 holes going into it. Hatchets that you could put lids on. And it had a wall in the middle. And so what they would do is, this wall had a gate in it. You could raise and lower. And so what they would do is they'd have the lions on just one side. And when you wanted to feed them, you drop them food down through the hole. And then when that side got too dirty from the lion's droppings, what they would do is they would drop food in the other side, open the gate, the lions would go through to eat the food, drop the gate, and then they'd send slaves down to the other side to clean it all up. And that's how they cleaned up after the lions. And they just moved them back and forth between the 2 chambers. And when you wanted to punish somebody, you dropped them in on the lions. And they had them for dinner. And if you're really mad at them, you waited until the lions were really hungry. I mean, that was the thing. And it was used as a way of executing people, as a horrible way to die. I mean, how would you like to be dangled with a bunch of kitty cats? And the lions loved live meat. So it was a handy thing. So we have the situation that we're set up with. And again, Daniel faces the same challenge as the 3, which is he knows God can deliver him, but he doesn't have a guarantee. But he chooses to remain loyal to God. And notice, he doesn't get angry with the king and say, why did you do something so dumb as to get yourself put up in this thing? What is it? These guys play to the king's ego. No one can pray to any other god, anybody else but you for a month. Not permanently, so you're not calling yourself a god, but just, this is a great thing, and we would really like to honor you this way. king thinks, well, I'd really like to be honored that way. And he's not thinking about the consequences. He tries to rescue, but he can't. Now, the law of the Medes and the Persians, you all are familiar with that, right?
Constitutional monarchy.
Yeah, constitutional monarchy.
Unalterable.
Yeah. Now, they were known for that. They were world famous. And I'd like to tell a story. There was an Egyptian city that they were trying to capture. And the city was holding out. And they realized, we're not going to be able to capture this city. We're going to have to give up on siege. So they came up with an idea. And not being Greeks, they didn't build a Trojan horse. They came up with a better idea. And what they did was during the night, they dug this hole in the ground. And then they built a frame over top of it, cloth, whatever, covered it with sand and made it look like solid ground. And then they set up a tent over it. They set up a table. And they called for a meeting. They called for a truce and called for a meeting with the leaders of the city. And they brought them out and they said, we want you to open up your gates to us. They said, are you crazy? I'm not going to. He said, no. We promise you, as sure as we're standing on solid ground, we give you our word that we will not conquer your city if you'll open your gates to us. And they go, well, all the Medes and the Persians, it's a done deal. Okay. They opened the gates and they came in and took the city. And they said, not fair, not fair. He said, no, it wasn't solid ground. They actually did that. But that's how firm this thing was, this situation. Again, God now intervenes, because what does he do? Just like he did under Nebuchadnezzar, where under Nebuchadnezzar Jews were given the right to freely worship God. Now under the Persians, the same right is granted. Because God delivers Daniel from these hungry animals. Now, how hungry are these animals? Well, again, these officials, we're not told exactly how many of them there were, but these officials then are tossed in, along with their wives and kids. And most likely the way it was done is, the children first, wives second, the guy last. So he sees his whole family get eaten before he goes. And we're talking brutal. And we're told, and it may be a figure of speech, that not a single bone was left unbroken before they hit the ground. But it's very likely, because you have not only very hungry lions, okay, but you have them enraged by God, and they may have just shredded them, rather than even reach the ground. And they may have dangled them and let them work them over, not just toss them in. I mean, we're talking vicious. Oh yeah, we're talking a vicious situation. That's why they're doing the stuff they're doing to each other over there. This is the way these people are. This is not unusual conduct. What we're seeing, and that's one of the things that our government has to understand about the situation in Iraq. Is that you go back to history, this is the way they've treated each other. And so it's a brutal thing. But again, the point of the chapter is God takes care of his own. He took care of Daniel individually, but he also took care of the Jews corporately through him by getting them this exemption where he is the God who delivers. They have the right to worship. So he's accomplishing great things in this. That's a part of the purpose. Again, now, when you go back to the situation that they're facing in Judea, the returnees, think about that. This says volumes to them. God can take care of you if you'll just trust him. God can deliver you from your enemies if you'll just trust him. And so, it's that reminder. Now, from this we move into the second half, if you go with the thing divided literarily, or the final part of the chiasm, if you go by the thing as it's divided linguistically, we have the situation now of Daniel's first vision, the vision of the four beasts, which then parallels Nebuchadnezzar's vision of the statue. So we have the four beasts. And again, the first one is
Babylon.
Babylon, the lion with the eagle's wings, stood up on its feet. The wings are plucked, given a man's heart. What would these symbols represent? The lion is the king of beasts. The eagle is the king of the birds. The ultimate royalty in Nebuchadnezzar. Wings plucked.
Humility.
Yeah, humbled. I think it's an allusion to God humbling him. Given the heart of a man, the humility that he learned. That he learned. He was not divine. He was not special. He's just a man under the hand of the Almighty God. So all these different allusions here in this symbolic beast probably allude to aspects of Nebuchadnezzar's life that are mentioned here in the book of Daniel. That's how I would see it. Yeah, but this beast is clearly Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. Remember, a king and his kingdom are one and the same. Now, the second beast, a bear raised up on its side with 3 ribs in its mouth. So what would be the 3 ribs?
Well, he's devouring 3 kingdoms, or 3 smaller.
Yeah, 3 kingdoms. That does make the most sense, because you know which kingdoms he conquered? The Medes and the Persians. Yeah, they conquered Babylon, which would be to their west. They conquered Egypt to the south, and they conquered Lydia to the north. Yeah, 3 kingdoms: north, west, and south. On its side probably indicates the unevenness of the Medo-Persian Empire, which we'll also see in the 2 different sizes of horns on the ram. The Persians were the dominant, the Medes were just the fighters. And so, this beast follows the first beast, which this kingdom would follow that kingdom. And so that all seems to be the literal behind the symbolic. Now the next beast is an interesting one. It's a leopard with how many wings?
4.
With 4 or 6? I think it's 4. 4 wings. Yeah. 4 wings of a bird.
4 wings, 4 heads.
Yeah. 4 heads. And again, the significance of wings probably having to do with speed. Later on, the goat that's going to attack the ram. Feet don't even touch the ground, it's going so fast. Probably an allusion to the speed at which Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire. You know, he conquered the whole empire in 3 battles. That was unheard of. That's faster than a blitzkrieg. In fact, the only reason it took as long as it did for him to conquer the Persian Empire is it took that long to walk that far. Even his battles didn't hardly slow him down. And in most instances, he didn't have to slow down because everyone stood in line to surrender to him. That's why he only fought 3 battles. Everyone surrendered. And but yeah, the leopard has to do with speed. The wings have to do with speed. And so it appears that would be the significance of it, that this empire would have the speed of conquest. But then also the 4 heads, of course, we know, again, later on, that it's going to divide up into 4 kingdoms, 4 Greek empires. So it fits the picture once again. And it's a reminder to the Jews that this Alexander's empire isn't the end. It's not going to lead to their independence, but rather their continued dominance. The next one, the ugly beast. Of course, we see that as the Roman Empire. Liberals see it as the Greek Empire, because they divide up the Mede and the Persian Empire. But this horrible beast devours and destroys. What is the significance of that, or the meaning of the way it's described? You know, what was the characteristic of the Roman Empire?
They just crush people. They stone
Yeah.
them to death.
They not only crushed people and stomped them, but then they bled them dry. You know, the Roman Empire was not beneficial to any of its subservient conquerees. You know, at least under the Persians, once they took you over, there were some benefits to being a part of the Persian Empire. There wasn't really any benefits to being a part of the Roman Empire, other than by 1st century, they had imposed the Roman peace, Pax Romana, which then allowed for the spread of the gospel. And they built all these highways to move their armies up and down, and they actually helped the economies by accident. But at the same time, they bled the economies dry, taxed them to death. Of course, they needed to fund their armies and all their social programs in Rome. But here, this horrible beast, of course, is that empire, and it's a crushing, destroying empire that's described. Now, you have, though, in the midst of this, then, the Son of Man receiving dominion. Here in chapter 7, verses 13 and 14 is where the term Son of Man comes from in the New Testament. And so when Jesus is alluding to it, that's what, or using that term, he's alluding back to here. And this would be Messiah receives the kingdom and takes over. That's the significance of it. And notice it's an eternal dominion, it's an eternal kingdom that again wipes out and replaces these others. And it comes at the end of time. So, it's not the church. It's Messiah's kingdom coming. And that's what. So again, you have these 4 empires that Israel or Judah will be subject to. But the point is, what? God is in sovereign control, and in the end, he's going to bring in the kingdom. He's in sovereign control. The presence of the Persian Empire and the fact that it is replaced by the Greek Empire and not by Messiah's kingdom doesn't mean Messiah's kingdom isn't coming. In fact, it's a reminder that Messiah's kingdom is coming. And when the Roman Empire comes and takes over, the fact that they lose their independence during the intertestamental period doesn't mean God's not in control. It just simply means that the 4th empire is here. And it's after that. That's why, though, in the New Testament, Acts chapter 1, when Jesus is about to go to heaven, the disciples say, is it now time to bring in the kingdom? Because we're with the 4th empire, and you've risen from the dead, and we know you're the Messiah, so is it time? I mean, they're asking a very legitimate question. And apparently, during his 40 days that he's meeting with them after his crucifixion and resurrection, he talks about the kingdom. I mean, they're not bringing this up because it hasn't been mentioned. So it's like, okay, you're telling us the kingdom's coming. Well, is it time? And of course his response is, I got a job for you to do. Not for you to know when, just get out and do what I tell you to do. And we're still watching and waiting. But there's nothing to indicate that he said, no, it's not coming anymore. We're just going to do something different. It's going to be spiritual. No, they were still looking for that physical kingdom that would replace these world empires. And that's why, of course, interpreters believe the Roman Empire has to be revived. Is the European Economic Community the beginning of the revival of this Roman Empire? Maybe. Is NATO that? Maybe. You say, well, it's not 10 nations. 10 nations have got to drop out. Again, does it have to be 10 nations? There will be 10 kings, but it could be 10 districts. In fact, I begin to suspect the Antichrist kingdom is not going to be just Europe. It's going to be worldwide. It may be, 10 nation groups, NATO being one of them, or EU being one of them, the United States possibly being one of them, China being one of them. Who knows? Again, we don't know until it happens. We come up with all our theories of what it's going to be, But in the end, it's not. It's just like, I'm more and more convinced that premillennialists, amillennialists, postmillennialists, we're all wrong somewhere. We just don't know where. And what we need to do is, again, know the scriptures, be watching and waiting, and when it starts happening, it will all make sense. You know, who knows, maybe there will be partial rapture of the church. I don't think so. I'm a pre-trib rapturist, and I'm going to stay that way until the world leader makes a pact with Israel, at which point I'll become a mid-trib rapturist.
It's interesting, there are so many movies and, ways of expressing this having been done in the last 20 years or 30 years.
Yeah.
When I was a new Christian in the 70s, we speculated, the charismatic movement was beginning, and we speculated on all this stuff. That's all we did, is we'd get together in Bible groups and talk about this stuff. We had no idea it would come this fast. I mean, here I'm speculating again, but I mean, things have really moved.
Yeah.
Just like they said it was going to. And I'm amazed.
Yeah. But one of the funny things, Al Lindsay came along at one point and said, if we get past 1978, and Jesus hasn't come back, I'll be very disappointed. Well, he did. And then I think he said, if we get past 1982, I forget which the next date was, and then there was 1988 or 89. He tried it 3 times, and he's finally given up.
But it just gets more acute, is what I'm trying to say. I don't mean
everything
acute,
everything is so in place that it's going, what is left to
and
do?
it's just speeding, towards some sort of point.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really something. I mean, you think 60 years ago, there wasn't the nation of Israel. And there didn't seem to be any chance of there being one. 100 years ago, there was not even the hint of it. That's a generation. So it's something. So God sovereignly has control. Now, we move to chapter 8, and you have the vision of the ram and the goat. And again, this one, the angelic interpreter interprets it for us. And he tells us that the ram is the Medo-Persians and the goat is the Greeks. Again, at the time that Daniel's prophesying this, the Greeks are not all that significant. They're a bunch of little city-states that can't get along with each other. A few kings later, Ahasuerus is going to try to conquer them. And we talked about that when we went through Esther. Between Esther's chapters 1 and 2 is the Persian attempt at conquering the Greeks and failure. But the Greek Empire is not all that significant at this time.
It's kind of funny looking through history. The Greeks are more than happy to fight amongst themselves when they've got a common enemy coming after them.
Yeah.
They all band together to fight off that guy, and then they go back to fighting each other again.
Yeah, that's right. They do that. Just like the Afghanis did the same thing. Which were the Medes. And but the Greeks, that was very typical of them. Very independent-minded. And so here in this vision, you have the ram that butts north, west, and south. Lydia, Babylon, Egypt. Notice the butting is in the directions of Persia's conquest. And then it's got the 2 sizes of horns that's noted. And that would show the unevenness of the empire, and that the Persians dominated it and the Medes were a smaller segment of it. Even though the Medes preceded the Persians in a sense, it's really a Medo-Persian empire. Still, it shows the dominance of the Persians. Now this goat, of course, is representative of the Greeks. He has only 1 horn. Why? Only 1 leader. Horns signify leaders and power. He whips up on the ram in rage. And Alexander's motivation for conquering was revenge. Because of Xerxes' attack, Ahasuerus' attack, but also another little piece of history that a lot of people don't know about is that after that attempt, the Persians actually hired Greek mercenaries. And they hired an army of about 10,000 Greek soldiers to help them in one of their wars. And when the battles were done with, the Greek mercenaries were ready to be paid. And the Persian king looked at the situation and said, you know, if they're all dead, I don't have to pay them. So he surrounded them with his Persian army with the goal of wiping them out. And they fought their way back to Greece. About 100 men made it out of 10,000 army, and they told their story trail. So, I mean, this was a remember the Alamo kind of attack. So you had those two things. And by the way, that's why then when Alexander began attacking, and I think it was his first battle, he was met by a Greek army that were mercenaries to the Persians. And they were viewed as traitors. And so what they did was they stood there and let Alexander's army slaughter them as punishment. They wiped them out and they went on. It was that horrible of a thing, and that was his motivation. And so this prophecy really signifies the rage that the Greek army had as they went to avenge these wrongs, and how they shattered the Persian Empire. Again, the fall of the Persian Empire was phenomenal in its quickness. Now, and of course, this prophecy points that out, that in God's design, this Persian Empire that's in power at the time Daniel's written is going to be destroyed suddenly. But it's all a part of his plan. He's in sovereign control. Now this leads us to chapter 9, the 70 weeks prophecy.
I just have a question on the 2300 days in verse 14.
Uh-huh.
I've heard it debated. The time of Antiochus Epiphanes. I mean, what exactly?
No one can find anything in history that adds up to that. In the sense of a beginning point and end point that lasted 2,300 days. For example, you've got what's going to happen with the desecration of the temple. By the way, in this prophecy, chapter 7, you've got this goat. The horn is broken. It turns into 4 horns. And you've got the little horn that boasts great things, which very likely is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. The 2,300 days, they try to show from the time that he desecrated the temple till it was cleansed, it's not 2,300 days. That's what they thought that would indicate. But it doesn't add up, and no combinations work, like 2,300 days and nights or whatever. 2,300 days is about how many years?
7.
Yeah, about 7 years. If you go to 30-day months, that's 360 days a year. So then 7 times that would be,
25.
yeah, a little more than 7. See, nothing quite works. The 2,300 days is much longer than the time. You know, the temple was desecrated for about 3 years or so from the time that it was desecrated until it was cleansed. So again, those numbers don't add up. So nothing quite adds up. That's the big challenge. So that's one of those mysteries. We're not sure what that one meant and how it was fulfilled. Or maybe it hasn't yet. Maybe it will be fulfilled during the Great Tribulation.
Well, it's going to be desecrated again. So.
Yeah, it's going to be desecrated again, and all this stuff is going to happen. So I just sort of wonder. Yeah. So, but you do have here, you've got this little horn is most likely a reference to Antiochus IV Epiphanes and the things that he did. In chapter 8, the little horn is most likely a reference to the Antichrist, the one to come, who's like Antiochus. So, yeah, in chapter 8, the little horn arises then out of that other horn. Now, chapter 9, the 70 weeks of vision. The chapter begins with Daniel praying. He's concerned. Now remember, he's there, and he's getting word about what's going on in Judea, but he's reading Jeremiah. Isn't that interesting? He's got a copy of Jeremiah's prophecy. And he's reading it, and he reads in Jeremiah the 70 years captivity.
Chapter 25.
That's right.
11 and 12.
That's right, chapter 25 of Jeremiah, 70 years captivity. And Daniel starts doing his math. And when you look at the chronology of things, this is about 70 years after he's been carried off into captivity in 605. But now there are some problems with this, because we're not exactly sure what are the 70 years. Because from 605 to 539 is not 70 years. Some people say, well, you can get 70 years because you need about 3 more, and that the countryside was devastated by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar before the city of Jerusalem fell. So the people in the countryside were already taken captive and hauled off. So the real captivity began sooner than 605. It began about 608 or something like that, 607. So they find a way numerically. But here's another interesting thing. From 586, when the temple is destroyed, okay, to 516, when it's built, is 70 years. So that's the likely 70 years fulfillment. But in the meantime, Daniel's reading this, and he's done his math, and he's realized, we're about 70 years along. So on the basis of prophetic promises, he begins to pray. His prayer is really based on that. Now, here's the fascinating thing about his prayer. Is God in Ezekiel has already revealed that there's 3 men he really respected. Remember that? Who were they? Job, Noah, and Daniel. Daniel's been named as one of God's top 3 guys. And yet, and clearly, when Daniel, from chapter 1, he's a righteous kid. And from chapter 6 that he's lived his life in righteousness. Blameless before the Lord. And yet in his prayer here in chapter 9, he doesn't say, when my forefathers sinned. He said, we. Daniel recognized that God deals with the nation corporately, and that he was as guilty as anybody else in the nation before God. And he humbles himself before God. And on the basis of God's promise to restore, he prays for restoration. Now, what he gets is the 70 weeks prophecy as God's answer. And again, when it's done, he is clueless as to what it actually means. But again, the point of 70 weeks prophecy, God is sovereignly in control of history. But now, he's moved from the big universal control, the empires, to Jerusalem. And notice he says, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. And here's the purpose of these 70 sevens. And actually the term there is heptad. It's sevens. 70 sevens. It's to finish the transgression, In other words, get done with their sin, to make an end of sins, it's parallel to finishing the transgression, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So, these 77s are designated by God to complete this stuff. Now, here's an interesting, fascinating thing. It's 790 years. Or 790 or 780 years.
What?
70 times 7.
483.
Yeah, 480. 480 years. Yeah, hold on a second.
473,000.
My math is terrible. Yeah, 480 years.
That's 490.
490 years?
Yeah.
7
times 7, 49.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. 490 years. Okay. You know how long Israel occupied the land from the time of Joshua's conquest until 605 when they're carried off into Babylonian captivity?
It's the same, isn't it?
490 years. Israel's history is flanked on two sides by the same amount of time with the captivity in between. That's just a little fascinating thing. That was a part of God's design, apparently. And if Jews had figured that out, they would have anticipated Jesus' first coming. Maybe that's why some of them were ready for it. But they figured out, the 490 years is about to run out. But the purpose of it is Jerusalem and the people, to complete all their prophetic history. So at the end of these 70 years, everything is supposed to be done. So he goes on then to say, now therefore, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there'll be 7 weeks and 62 weeks.
That's 69.
Yeah, that's the 69.
483,
Yeah, that's the 483 years. We don't know what the 7 and the 62 are. We don't know, because apparently nothing happened after 7 sevens is 49. We can't find any.
It's the 49 years it took to rebuild.
Yeah, but that's at the wrong end of the thing. Yeah,
prophet
thing. Yeah.
So you're saying it's Joshua to captivity is 490, and then 490 to Jesus?
From
So we had
from
Joshua
return from
and
Babylon.
Jesus.
Yeah, return from Cyrus's or from Zerubbabel's to return until Jesus is 483 years. 7 years is missing.
Oh, yeah.
And that's till Jesus' crucifixion. Yeah, 7 years is missing.
Why the two calendar differences between 445 BC and 444? I mean, where's the discrepancy?
The discrepancy
Because you
is there by how they calculate years.
You take the decree by Artaxerxes Longimanus.
Yeah.
I mean, there's good arguments both ways, but can't really decide.
Yeah. We can't. That's one of the difficulties. Honer deals with that in his book, Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ, and argues for which is the legitimate date and all that. But yeah, that's part of it has to do with the debate over over calendars and chronology.
But they're both based on a 360-day year.
Yeah.
Just one starts at one point earlier.
Yeah. In fact, see, you had two calendars in operation at all times in the ancient world. Like in Judah, you had the civil calendar and the religious calendar. And but also even then they counted like kings' ascensions differently. Some of them had the regnal year as the first year. Others had the first full year after they took the throne. So you had all kinds of different ways of reckoning time, depending on who you were dealing with. And so that's one of the challenges, even in this, in figuring things out. And also, what you find is with prophetic calendar in the Old Testament, the prophetic calendar worked off of a 30-day month and a 360-day year. And of course, that's where they start doing the calculations from the decree, and they calculate 360 days times the 483 years.
173
And then you divide that by 365 and a quarter to work your way, and you end up with, I think it's 32 AD, April 6th, Jesus riding into town on a donkey. The triumphal entry, which is the week before he's crucified. And here it says, at the end of the 69th week, Messiah the Prince will be cut off. But Messiah, he is identified as Messiah the Prince, is going to come. And notice, a part of the purpose of this is to restore and build Jerusalem. And, of this decree, which the first decree to build the temple was not to restore the city. It's the second decree under Artaxerxes, after Esther, that Nehemiah uses to rebuild the temple. So this is a reference to Nehemiah's rebuilding the walls, not temple. Nehemiah's rebuilding the walls was the beginning of this countdown. And so we have that. And we're told that the street will be built again, and the wall, and even in troublesome times, and they had troubles. And then we're told, after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. In other words, it's for the benefit of others. And the people of the prince who is to come, we now know it's the Romans. It's a reference to them. And the prince who is to come is not Messiah, but the Antichrist. These people will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will be with a flood. We're not sure what that means. But clearly the Romans came in and destroyed both the city of Jerusalem and the temple, which is talking about. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then he, and this we see as a reference to the Antichrist. He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week in 7 years. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even to the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Yeah. Some obscure language, but apparently this person who is to come will make a 7-year pact, and at the midpoint of this will desecrate the temple. So we believe the Antichrist will make a 7-year treaty with Israel. They'll build the temple, and at the midpoint of the 7 years, he'll go in and do what Antiochus did about 138, 139 BC, where he went into the temple, declared himself to be God, and demanded worship and sacrificed a pig on the altar and desecrated the temple. And of course, Hanukkah celebrates the cleansing of the temple after the Jews got control back again.
What did you say? You said Joshua lived in captivity is 490 years. And you said the other end, from Jesus' crucifixion backwards, was 483
It's
years.
about 483 years.
What was
7
that,
years is
what
missing.
was that first bookend before Jesus' crucifixion, the beginning of the 483 years?
The beginning of the 483 years was the decree by Artaxerxes to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem.
Okay.
And that occurs about 444, 445 BC.
So
March 13th or something like that.
Now, a preterist or an all-millennialist would have to make the he. How would you interpret that?
That's good to ask.
I mean, you'd almost have to make that Messiah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think amongst the amillennialists, they go both ways. And I'm not sure how preterists do it. I haven't found any good, at least to this point, a good preterist commentary on Daniel as such. They comment on Daniel in their books, but I would love to see one do a complete commentary and deal with this in great detail. Of course, they see it being fulfilled in the first century, as do the amillennialists. That this is all fulfilled, and that this, or and those who see that he not referring to Messiah, they would see it referring to Titus, because Titus came in and destroyed the temple. But the problem is Titus did not desecrate the temple, and he didn't do it at the middle of some 7-year time period. So there are other things, but then they don't take everything as literally either. Does that make sense? Yeah, but it is. It's real funny. Amongst the amillennialists, there are a variety of views. They don't. They're not uniformity. For that matter, amongst the premillennialists, there's not all that much uniformity either. Depending on how they see things. Although they would see, at least they would agree that the kingdom hasn't come yet, that it hasn't been fulfilled. But here's an important thing to understand: the amillennialists and the preterists, they're not questioning the inspiration or the truthfulness of the text. They're just simply interpreting it differently. They have a high view of Scripture. They just have interpreted it differently. And so our debate with them should be a debate respecting the fact that they do love the Lord and they do believe His Word. They just see it fulfilled in a different way than we would, is what it boils down to.
That passage on the flood, Revelation says that it's the end of the matter with the Jews, basically, and the devil turns from the Jews and goes to the Christians.
Yeah.
So at the end of the matter, that would fit.
Yeah.
It says the end of the matter. The end of it shall be with the flood.
Yeah.
The devil spews water out of his mouth, tries to somehow.
Yeah, that's where they're taking that imagery out of Revelation chapter 12 and trying to read it back into this and give this meaning. And I'm hesitant about that. I think that may be a mistake.
But if you say the end, though, is not the end of the world or anything,
Right.
it's just the end
Just
of the
the end of
matter
this
with
phase.
the Jews,
Yeah.
and now we turn to the Christians.
Yeah,
I thought that might be
yeah,
that's the only thing I'm saying.
yeah. But that wouldn't be here in Daniel. You see, that's the problem, because this prophecy is focused on the Jews, Jerusalem, and God's program for them. And there's no indication in it at this point that now He's going to move His program to the Gentiles. In fact, when you go through the other prophetic literature about the coming of Christ, the Gentiles are always secondary
Yeah.
to Israel.
But the timeline's the same, right? I mean, the Messiah shall be cut off,
Yeah.
and then all
Yeah,
that.
those things are the
So
same.
that's the same.
Yeah.
It's just that, I mean, obviously, Daniel's only concerned with his people,
Right.
and Michael says that.
Yeah,
This is just
This
you
is
know,
just
this is out for you. Don't
right. Yeah.
There is
And
no
so-
other world for them. Right?
But so then we have this prophecy that Daniel doesn't understand, that's given, and its point is again what? God is sovereignly in control of Judah's history, and He is going to bring it to its consummation. But even at the time He does, it's going to be a very desperate, difficult time in which the one who makes desolate will be on the scene. It's not just Messiah the Prince is going to come and take care of things, but prior to that, you're going to have this other Messiah. And in fact, the real Messiah is going to be cut off. And you're going to have this other. If Jews had understood this, see, the problem is they take this chapter corporately. They believe that they fulfilled it rather than seeing it in Christ. And so you have that where if they had understood it, they would have recognized what was going on with Jesus. But of course they didn't. And that. So, moving from that, we move to chapters 10, 11, and 12, which is the final vision. And they really all go together. And in chapter 10, of course, Daniel's praying and fasting because he's trying to figure out chapter 9. That's the implication. And the angel comes. And this chapter gives us a lot of our angelology, and I believe has influenced, wrongly, incorrectly, much of spiritual warfare's concepts of territorial demons and all this kind of stuff. Because you got this angel that comes, and Daniel's been praying and fasting, and the angel comes and says, Daniel, I would have come quicker, but I was busy. I was fighting the prince of Persia. And then Michael came and relieved me. When I'm done with you, I've got to go back. That's really what he's saying. So from this, though, they come up with this idea of territorial demons and all this kind of stuff. But that's not the point of the passage. The point of the passage is that Daniel's so significant that God would send one of His most significant angels to answer his questions. Who he would even have to pull him off the battle lines. That's how important Daniel was. But it took a while. And he's going to tell Daniel, he's going to answer some of his questions. Now, he goes through and he describes, first of all, how 3 more kings are going to rise in Persia, which includes Ahasuerus. Actually, Ahasuerus is the 4th one. He's Xerxes in history. We know him as Ahasuerus. It says the 4th one will attack Greece, which was talked about. Or he'll attack Greece, but then eventually a Greek king is going to come along and wipe out the Persian Empire. The kingdom be divided 4 ways, and then he begins through the rest of chapter 10 and all the way through chapter 11 describing the next 200 years of history in intertestamental history. The phenomenal thing about this is to get some books and study this, and you can go through verse by verse. You can see how it's been fulfilled, literally. Fulfilled so accurately, so literally, that liberal scholars concluded this part of Daniel had to be written after the fact. Nobody could know history in that kind of detail that far in the future. I mean, that's the conclusion. There's just absolutely no way. But the whole point of the chapter is what? God's in control. He's in control of history. He's in control of this empire and these 2 empires fighting over Judah. Now we know from history that what happened is when, after Alexander the Great died, and a good movie, there's one, Alexander the Great, not the recent one, Alexander the Gay, but the one they had, I think it's Burt Lancaster was playing Alexander, or one of these guys. It's an old one from the 60s. It's actually quite accurate historically and about his conquest. But when he's dying, as they like to say, he conquered every country he could, and then he decided to conquer women, and one of them conquered him with syphilis. And so as he's dying, he's got one son who'd already been born, who's under the care of one of the generals. And the generals are all standing around, and they ask him, who gets the kingdom? Who gets the kingdom? And being the man who really loved his country like he did, he says, the strongest. He didn't give it to anybody. I really believe if he'd have just named somebody, history would have been very different. But because he didn't, all these generals looked around. I think it's me. And they begin about a 20-year war. And when it's over, there's 4 left. And they divide up the kingdom amongst themselves. And so one of them gets Greece itself, one of them gets Egypt, but one of them gets much of Turkey, that area up there, and then one of them gets Egypt, and another one gets Egypt and Palestine, and then one gets Syria all the way to India. And so the general Seleucus gets Syria to India, the vast portion of it. A guy named Ptolemaeus gets Egypt and Palestine. They become the Ptolemies. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Antiochus the 4th Epiphanes is a Seleucid, is a descendant of Seleucus. And who's the most famous descendant of Ptolemy? Herod the Great feared her greatly. Cleopatra.
Cleopatra and Mark Antony.
That's right. Cleopatra was Greek, not Egyptian. And she lived during the time of Herod the Great. And she hated Herod with a pink and purple passion. And he feared her greatly. And of course she begged Mark Antony to go wipe him out. But Mark Antony liked him. Reason being is Herod was loyal to whoever was the Roman emperor. He was the perfect guy to have in charge of that area. And so he wasn't going to mess with him. But Herod was so paranoid about her that he built Masada. That was the purpose of Masada, where he could go hold out when she came after him. But he also, there's another castle, I guess you call it, called the Herodian, between Jerusalem and Masada, in case he didn't get to Masada before she got there. I mean, that's how paranoid he was. But yeah, she's the most famous. And so they began, in their history, they began under the control of the Ptolemies in Egypt. And the Seleucids kept trying to conquer the Ptolemies, and back and forth. And these chapters detail all the intrigue, even to the point of, for example, one guy had his daughter marry this other guy with the idea that then she'd sort of be a spy, but she was loyal to her husband and betrayed her dad. You know, another one.
Bernice and Philippines.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, and you got the one where the guy defeats the northern kingdom and makes him divorce his wife and marry his daughter with the idea then that they'll produce a child, a son, who will unite the two kingdoms. Well, then the king dies, or actually, they all die because the ex-wife has him and his new wife poisoned. And meanwhile, her brother's trying to get there in time to rescue her, but doesn't. I mean, all these things really did happen that way in history. And again, that's why the liberals are just baffled by it. You know, you couldn't have known this. All the intrigue that went on. And all the brutality. In the meantime, though, what's happening in Judah? Well, they're under the influence of the Ptolemies, and they're basically maintaining their ethnic identity. But just like it talks about in here, where many of the leaders then, they were approached by Antiochus IV and switched sides and sort of helped him gain control of Palestine. Now, Antiochus had spent much of his childhood in Rome because his either his dad or his grandfather had lost to the Romans, and he was taken as a hostage. So he grew up in Rome, and he knew what the Roman armies could do. So when he went down to conquer Egypt, he finally succeeds. And this is, again, talked about in here. He goes down to attack the south, and he is stopped. He wins the battle. Egypt is finally on its knees before him, and he's going to plunder the country and take it over. And he's achieved his dream of all of his ancestors. And up, this is in Alexandria, Egypt, up floats a boat. And out of the boat climbs a Roman general who comes to shore with his little entourage and says, Egypt is under Roman protection. They've asked for our protection. So, get out. Now, the Roman policy was, if you asked for help, they helped themselves to you. And so Egypt is about to become a Roman colony. Is what it is, a Roman Roman possession. But he tells them, get out. Well, Antiochus says, well, I'm not sure I want to get out. I'm just one. And you're just a few guys. And I got a whole army behind me. So as the story goes, this general takes out his sword and draws a circle around Antiochus and says, you're not stepping across that line until you give me an answer. And if you do not leave now, Rome's going to come rescue Egypt. And Antiochus thinks about it and says, I think I'll go home. Because he knew what a Roman army, what a Roman legion would do to his army. He knew he didn't have a prayer of a chance. And so he packs up and heads home. And again, in fulfillment of this, what happens is, as he's going home, he goes by Jerusalem now. He's had an army that's fought a war and it hadn't been paid. Because the way you pay your army is you plunder the cities you conquer. Well, he hadn't had a chance to do any plundering. So he's got to figure out a way to pay them. Well, one of the ways he paid his armies, in fact, this ended up being his demise, he died trying to do this, pay an army, was that he would attack temples and rob them. And use their money, because people gave to temples, and temples had lots of money. And so you plunder them, and then you pay your army with it. So he's going to do that to Jerusalem, and of course they say no. And at that point, the reason he called himself Epiphanes, he thought he was an appearance of God to man. And so he had been wanting the Jews to worship the Greek gods. He wanted to impose Greek culture on the Jews. Alexander's dream of everybody being made Greek. And so he, believing himself to be a god, then demanded that they worship him. And of course, he goes into the temple, desecrates it with a pig on the altar, and sets up a armed post to guard the temple. And anyone who came to try to worship there, they killed. So these pilgrims, not knowing what's going on, they show up to worship in the temple, and the Greeks are in charge, and they keep being slaughtered. So I guess word finally got out. But he does this because he's angry about losing Egypt. And so he does it. He sets up that thing, and he goes on back home, and eventually dies in a battle trying to plunder the temple. In the meantime, though, his officials go and they want to impose this worship of Antiochus on the people. And in one of the villages, they approach, and the head priest in the village was a guy named Matthias. And when they say you got to worship him, he says, "There's no way." And one of the other priests steps forward and says, "I'll do it." And so Matthias grabs a spear and runs him and the Greek official through. And then runs to the woods and starts the Maccabean revolt. Now the reason it's called the Maccabean revolt is because Judas, Matthias' son, Matthias eventually dies in battle. Judas takes over. His battle plan was basically, there they are, let's attack. And so he became known as the Hammer, which is what Maccabeus means. So they called them the Maccabees because of him. So it's like William the Bruce, that he was known for his weapons that he used. And so here they gain their, eventually then Judas, in the Maccabean revolt, they win phenomenal victories that militarily, strategically, just wouldn't be possible apart from God's blessing. And after 3 years, they gain their independence and negotiate a peace and become an independent nation for the first time. And they go to the temple and they cleanse it, and of course that is what Hanukkah is all about. It's celebrating the cleansing of the temple. And so this again is detailed in here, and liberal scholars are amazed by it because of this. Now, one of the differences, though, is in this, you come to that point of the cleansing of the temple, and you come to the end, and it's not quite the same ending as happened to Antiochus. And the basic feeling is this, is that at that point, the prophetic message, remember we talked about telescopic view, where you can't tell which mountaintop you're looking at? It moves from the first Antichrist, or the first abomination of desolation, Antiochus, to the second, the Antichrist, who will be destroyed by supernatural means. In fact, he won't even die. He'll be cast alive into the lake of fire. And so that's why now some scholars think that at that point, and they see that around 135 is when the author's writing. He's guessing what's going to happen next, and he missed it. That's how they go, because it's before Antiochus' death. And now, when this story is over, Daniel, of course, is puzzled by it, bothered even more. And what does the angelic messenger tell him? Yeah, sealed up. Yeah, you're not going to know all the answers. In fact, what's going to happen to Daniel? He tells him, and this is very significant. Notice what he tells him. Actually, before that, we see what he says there about the very end. There'll be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time, your people will be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. I mean, clearly a reference to what? Yeah, the great white throne judgment, the great tribulation.
And a power failure.
Right.
Okay, we're back.
Okay. So let's see, where were we now? Before our power
We
failure.
were about verse
Yeah,
3.
that's right, yeah. So we have, this is a great description. This is, of course, fleshed out in the book of Revelation and other places. I like what it says, it's going to be a time of trouble as it was never since there was a nation. And again, that's the Great Tribulation. And we're told in Revelation that if the days weren't shortened, mankind wouldn't survive during the bowl judgments. So this is, the end of the Great Tribulation, then the coming in of the Great White Throne. It's interesting because this reference to resurrection we take as possibly the Great White Throne, but it may also be that, and this is very likely true, that at the end of the tribulation, assuming that the only people raptured is the church, that at the end of the tribulation, with the second coming of Christ, will be another resurrection of the Old Testament saints who are to reign with Him in the kingdom. Now, either the Old Testament saints will be raptured with the church. The problem is that they're not the church. Or they will be resurrected, but they will enter into the kingdom. In fact, Daniel was promised he's going to be resurrected and he's going to participate in the kingdom. Abraham, I believe that Abraham's got to be resurrected and participate in the kingdom. Why? Because God promised that he would inherit that land, and he hasn't yet. So Abraham and Isaac and Jacob got to be resurrected and enter into the kingdom and inherit the land. So, those are some things. Those are some of the promises yet to be fulfilled if they're going to be fulfilled literally. And so it would be this resurrection. So it's very likely that this resurrection is that. And now, everlasting life, those who are resurrected to that, but also
Resurrected the white man.
That's it.
yeah.
That's the trumpet.
Now that they're hanging out here a little while longer, but those, you have the destiny of those resurrected. The reason why we see great white throne judgment is because both the wicked and the righteous are resurrected, and we're told that the wicked will be resurrected at the end of the 1,000 years for the great white throne judgment. And so what you really have occurring here is both resurrections are being seen in the same light. Again, the telescopic thing. Because the resurrection of the saints occurs at the rapture of the church, maybe the beginning of the 1,000 years. The resurrection of the wicked occurs at the end of the 1,000 years. And there's this 1,000-year gap that's not even mentioned here, other than that the righteous will shine in it. So there's not a lot of details, but there's bits and pieces that are actually possibly spread over more than 1,000 years in God's program. And again, this is the nature of prophetic literature. But I like how it ends. But you, Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book till the time of the end. In other words, people are not really going to understand these prophecies until they happen. My interpretation of them is just a guess. And odds are it's going to be different. But we have no clue as to how. I've probably got part of it right, part of it wrong. In fact, all of that's going to be true. Of all of our different ones. When it happens, I think it'll be very literal. More literal than what we can imagine. In other words, when it happens, people will be able to go, that's it. And it will happen literally. Now, how that is, we're not sure. But he says, many will run to and fro, and knowledge will increase. We say, oh, the internet. Who knows? He says, then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on the river bank and all. And, he listens in on this conversation. He doesn't understand. He wants to know the answers. And then he's told, don't worry about it. He says, go your way, Daniel. For the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And then he tells us, from the time of the daily sacrifices, there's this 1,290 days. Okay, 1,290 days, 3.5 years. 3.5 prophetic years. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. 45 more days after the 3.5 years. The guess from many, the regathering of the Jews, the sheep goat judgment, all those kind of things going on. It'll take 45 days to clean up the mess. And in fact, we're told in other prophetic literature, it'll take 7 months just to bury the dead. After the millennial kingdom has begun. But then there's a promise, but you go your way to the end, for you shall rest, i.e. you're going to die of old age, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. Again, this regeneration, this resurrection. Remember, when Jesus goes to raise Lazarus from the dead, what does Martha say? Jesus says, Jesus says, Lazarus is going to rise again. And she says, I know he will rise again.
At the resurrection.
That's right. Actually, and she uses the term at the regeneration, which was their term for the resurrection. And this is the one she's referring to. The one where Daniel would be resurrected, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be resurrected, where the saints would be resurrected to enter the kingdom of Messiah. And she says, I know he's going to be resurrected when Messiah's kingdom comes. And that's when Jesus says, I am the resurrection. I'm the Messiah. I am the kingdom. I am the resurrection. The resurrection is in a person. It's me. And so Daniel's told he's going to be resurrected. He's told he's going to die, but he's also going to be resurrected. And it's interesting that that's what the book of Daniel ends on. This promise. Why? Because, again, it's a point being made to the readers and the listeners, the people who are going to receive this, is that there is a future destiny of the nation of Israel that the righteous who will shine get to participate in. Live for the Lord, faithfully await, and know that you will be resurrected to be a part of that kingdom following your death. It's a long ways off, but you will still participate in the kingdom. And so, if Daniel gets to, others get to as well. And so that's the point. So, in summary, again, the whole point of the book of Daniel is
God's sovereignty will be
that's right.
made
God is sovereignly in control, both of the individual's life and of nations. He's sovereignly in control of your and my lives. And He can bless us, He can curse us. He can protect us, He can let us perish. And nationally, whatever happens at the next election, God's still in control. Internationally, whatever happens in all the world deals and wheeling and dealing and stuff, God's still in control. And He will elevate and destroy as He wants to do. And we need to trust Him. And this kingdom of Messiah is coming. It's just a matter of time. God has things He must still accomplish with the nation of Israel. But this kingdom is coming, and we wait for it. And God is in control. And no matter what happens politically over the next few years, no matter what happens militarily over the next few years, it doesn't mean God's not in control. He raises up, takes down empires, and He is sovereign. Just, I don't know about you, it's still hard to live with that, though, on a day-to-day grind. That's the promise we have from the book of Daniel.
fabulous.
Any other questions?
I have a question. In verse 7 there, he's asking how long is it going to be, and the man dressed in linen raises his hand. It says times, and half a time. As soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. That times half the time, what is that referring to?
That measures up with or matches the 1,290 days. It's 3.5 years. Time, 1 year, times 2 years, half a time, half a year. And it's used here and in the book of Revelation. So, yeah, and it's 3.5 years. The midpoint of the week of the 7 years, 3.5 years. There's a lot that's divided. And in Revelation, you have the same thing, the division of the time period into 2 3.5 year units.
Well, I see the 3.5 years, I'm just asking,
Yeah.
is that particular reference to the tribulation?
Yes, it is.
That was the Hebrew way of saying 3.5
Yeah,
years.
that's a Hebrew way of saying 3.5 years, and it's clearly the tribulation is the reference of that. Probably the second half of the tribulation, which is the time of the greatest suffering. Okay, well, let's see.